What's going on, guys? So I kind of just want to share some stuff that God has been kind of slowly revealing to me as I've been kind of on this journey for the past couple months. He's showed me so much stuff that I've just never seen or like thought about before. And so I want to be able to walk with a level of boldness and not hold it back just because I'm learning it, but also having the boldness to speak about what I feel like he's putting on my heart. And so Um, this story is a famous story. I'm not gonna read the whole story. I'm just gonna kind of give you guys the gist, and then um, we're gonna go from there. We're gonna go from there. But this is the story of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who are famously known as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Um, if I mess up any names, forgive me. I'm still learning. But this is them and their story of the furnace or being thrown in the furnace. So just for some context, basically King Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon at the time, and he sent out a decree saying anyone who, you know, doesn't kneel down before me at this specific time, whatever, and praise me, they're gonna get thrown in the furnace. And it was all a plot. But either way, these three exiles from Israel were obviously not going to worship him. And so they were like, look, we're going to worship our God. And so they were like, well, now we have to throw them in a furnace. But so big, famous story. Anyways, I'm just going to read a little bit of it here. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer for... Okay, actually, I'm going to go a little bit further. I'm just going to read this little chunk here. I'm not even going to read the whole thing, but just this little chunk. It says, some Chaldeans took this offense to come forward and maliciously accuse the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, may the king live forever. You, as king, have issued a decree to everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music must fall down and worship the gold statue. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon. Let's stop there and just recognize that these three were appointed. It says, there are some Jews you have appointed to manage the province of Babylon. They were not lowly people in Babylon. Let's start there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men have ignored you, the king. They do not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Then, in a furious rage, Nebuchadnezzar gave orders to bring in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar asked them, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you don't serve my God or worship the gold statue I have set up? Now, if you're ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, drum, and every kind of music, fall down and worship the statue I made. But if you don't worship it, you will immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God who can rescue you from my power? So you can kind of see the setup here. And just for complete context, I feel like I am going to actually just read the whole story. And so, in response to that, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to give you an answer to this question. It's my favorite part here. If the God we serve exists, then he can rescue us from the furnace of blazing fire. And he can rescue us from the power of you, the king. And this is where this part hit me so hard. But even if he does not rescue us, we want you as king to know that we will not serve your gods or worship the gold statue you set up. And this was so wild to me because a lot of times we have this idea that like our faith isn't built up until the trial actually starts, right? Like, this thing was sent so that your faith may be built, and at the end of the trial, your faith is going to be that much stronger, right? But what I'm seeing here in this story is that their faith was already solidified unto death, regardless of what happened, right? They believed that their God could save them, and they believed so much so in their God that they said, even if their God did not save them from the furnace, it still wouldn't be worth them worshiping the king or the king's gods, right? Or the statues or whatever it is. And so their faith was already solidified. Nothing about this trial that they were about to endure had anything to do with the level at which they had faith, right? And so going forward, then Nebuchadnezzar was filled with rage, and the expression of his face changed toward Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He gave orders to heat the furnace 7 times more than was customary. So they usually, I guess they had a particular heat that was normal for them, but then in this scenario, he was so mad, he was like, we're just going to heat it even more. But check this out, check what happens. And he commanded some of the best soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So these men, in their trousers, robes, head coverings, and other clothes, were tied up and thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Since the king's command was so urgent and the furnace extremely hot, the raging flames killed those men who carried up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. That's crazy. We all know kind of the end of the story. They get saved. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego get saved. But the people that put them in the furnace died just from the heat that was being emitted because they heated it up so hot. And these 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar jumped up in alarm. He said to his advisors, didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire? Yes, of course, your majesty, they replied to the king. He exclaimed, look, I see 4 men, not tied, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, you servants of the Most High God, come out. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire. When the satraps, prefects, governors, and the king's advisors gathered around, they saw that the fire had no effect on the bodies of these men. Not a hair of their heads was singed. Their robes were unaffected, and there was no smell of fire on them. Nebuchadnezzar exclaimed, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He said he sent his angel and rescued his servants who trusted in him. They violated the king's command and risked their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I shall issue a decree that anyone of any people, nation, or language who says anything offensive against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will be torn limb from limb and his house made a garbage dump. For there is no other God who is able to deliver like this. Then the king rewarded Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And so that story became so real to me, and I had heard that story so many times in my life. Just, and it's used as metaphors, it's used for a lot of different things, but it made me realize as I kept dwelling on the story, right? What is the point of trials in our life? And a lot of times, and especially in churches, we get taught that the point of the trial in your life is meant to build up your faith, right? And then what happens is, we go from one measure of faith to another measure of faith. And then once we get to that measure of faith, then another trial comes in to get us even higher in our faith, and then a greater trial comes in, and then our faith gets even more. And there's this kind of like hierarchy of faith that we're somehow rising because of the trials that we are taking on. And then there's like this backdrop of saying almost that God is the one that is giving us the trial because he wants our faith to be grown. And when I think of that, a lot of things can come from that are negative. I think one in particular is you can end up having who has the greater faith, right? Like you see somebody over here, maybe a family member pass or something like that. And now they're, this is your moment to solidify your faith, and your faith is going to grow as a result of this. And I don't feel like that's a caring way of looking at it. And then you also have the opposite effect, which is people will start to look internally and say, my faith is not big enough. My faith is not strong enough. I can't get through this trial. My faith is weak, my whatever. And now it becomes about us, and everything is now looking inward at, well, what level of faith do I have? And is this trial meant for just my faith to grow? And I would just say, or I would like to say, that I don't think, and I'm not saying that the trials in our lives don't build up our faith. I'm not saying that does not happen, but I would not say that the trials in your life or in any of our lives are meant specifically for our faith to then be enhanced. Because in this story, I see, one, that their faith was already solidified. If there was a measure of faith, it was already full before they were thrown into the fire, right? Before they were thrown into the fire, their faith was already at capacity, at least the way I see it, right? But two, the other thing that happens is, as a result of the faith that they already had through the trial, God got all the glory. And a nation that was outsiders and exiled all of the Jewish people was able to say, and I'll read it again once I find it, for there is no other God who is able to deliver like this. It makes me think that the point of the trial and the furnace and all of that was God's glory, because their faith was already solidified. The only outcome of that was that a nation that did not respect or know God respected and understood that there was no other being on this planet that was as powerful as he was, right? And so when we think about our lives, I wouldn't say that we should look at our trials as a measure of our faith or as a thing that is specifically sent for our faith's purpose. But I think we should look at where our faith is amidst the trial and allow our faith in the trials to give God glory. And that's just something that he really, really showed me. And I just want, and it's very freeing too. Like, it's something that makes me feel like I don't have to sit here and worry like, man, I hope I have enough faith for this, or, this temptation over here is just, I don't know if I have enough faith for this. That temptation might last for the next 3 years. And, I'm just, hopefully after 3 years, my faith is just going to be so much more. It's going to lead me here. And it takes the pressure off of me, because the end goal is not me. The end goal is him. That is the end all be all. God's glory. That's it. And so that's what he's kind of revealed to me. And if you want to read that story for yourself, it's in Daniel chapter 3. The book of Daniel is amazing too. I would recommend that. But Daniel chapter 3 is that story. And then later on in the book of Daniel, you get Daniel in the lion's den as well. And so yeah, I don't have a whole lot else to say about that, but if you guys were listening or watching, I appreciate it. Yeah, peace.